There is a type of exhaustion that is not measured in the body. It lives in the silence between one thought and another, like a tide that never recedes. It is the weight of trying every day to be happy and discovering that this search can turn into one's own prison. Seneca said that we get lost when we confuse living well with accumulating, and that there is no favorable wind for one who does not know where they are going. Perhaps that is what we feel, a boat sailing aimlessly at the mercy of invisible current. There are those who believe that restlessness comes from a lack, but often it flourishes in excess. Not just the excess of things that are touched, but of those that are not seen, expectations that don't fit us, resentments that we hold onto as if they were relic, the secret need to prove that we are worth something to eyes that may not even be watching us. These invisible possessions are like rope tied to the chest. They don't weigh on our hands, but they tighten our breath. Epictetus would remind us that there is a limit to what we can truly lead. He called this the distinction between what depends on us and what does not. It is a simple truth, but one that escapes us. We try to control what others feel, what tomorrow will bring, what has already passed and will not return. And in this effort, we become exhausted, like someone trying to hold back the wind with their hand. Happiness, for a Stoic, is not a trophy to be won at the end of a long race. It's more like a glass of water that is already full. It doesn't need to be constantly refilled so it doesn't run dry. It is the feeling of sufficiency, of realizing that even if something is missing on the outside, there is fullness on the inside. But for that, you need to empty first. Detachment is not losing. It is letting go of what was never ours. It is preparing the emotional ground, like someone cleaning the backyard after a storm. We remove the broken branches, the mud, dry leaves, and what is left is space for something new to grow. And perhaps that is the silent promise of detachment, not tearing pieces from us, but giving back to the world what never belonged to us. Seneca once wrote that we are not poor for having little, but for desiring much. And perhaps the beginning of true freedom lies precisely there, in recognizing that we lack nothing when we already have the essential, like the traveler who, upon realizing he is carrying less weight, begins to hear the sound of his own step better, the weight we don't realize we're carrying. Sometimes the hardest weight to let go of is precisely the one we never realized we were holding. It accumulates little by little, like dust on a piece of furniture we no longer notice. They are small grudges, promises that were not kept, silences that we hold to avoid hurting others. And yet, every detail settles in us like a stone in a backpack. One day we look around and realize we are tired, but we can't say exactly from what. Seneca said that no wind is favorable for one who does not know where they are going. Living without clarity is letting yourself be carried away by the current. Sometimes we follow a path to please. Other times, we take another to avoid conflict. It's like crossing the sea without a compass. The waves move us, but they never bring us closer to solid ground. And in the effort to please everyone, what is left often only an obedient body and an exhausted soul. This invisible burden also comes from trying to hold on to stories that no longer fit. We hold on to resentments as if they were anchors that keep us safe, but in reality, they trap us in the same place. Every time we say it's okay when it's not, we add one more thread to the net that immobilizes us. And it is this net, almost imperceptible, that prevents us from breathing deeply. The body feels before the mind realizes. The chest tightens. Sleep is fragmented. The gaze is tired. It is a sign that something needs to be put down, but the fear of disappointing makes us hold on for one more day. Epictetus would say that this is trying to control the uncontrollable, and by doing so, we turn ourselves into prisoners of what we most wish to avoid. Perhaps it takes courage to admit that some burdens are not proof of love, but silent traps, and that letting them go is not an act of abandon, but of survival. After all, no one gets through winter carrying everything they own. We choose the essential, not because the rest has no value, but because staying alive requires light. Thus, the first freedom does not come from big changes, but from realizing that the weight that pulls us down can be removed. It is a simple but transformative gesture, like taking off a heavy coat after a long walk. The air enters more deeply, the step becomes firmer, and for an instant we feel something rare. The body and soul walking in the same direction. The attachment to narratives that trap us. There are stories we tell ourselves so many times that they become part of our skin. Phrases that repeat in silence. I will only be happy when I need to be recognized. If I achieve this, everything will change. These narratives function as invisible script, and even if they are not true, we continue to play the role that has been imposed on us or that we have learned to assume. The problem is that these stories rarely set us free. They push us towards a hypothetical future, always postponed, always out of reach. We live like travelers who can only rest when they spot a horizon that never arrives. The promise of happiness turns into a trap. The more we run towards it, the more we realize that we are in the same place. It is a paradox that consumes years and erases the present. Epictetus said that it is not things that disturb us, but the opinions we have about. When we cling to internal narratives, what traps us is not the fact itself, but the interpretation we choose to feed. It's like insisting on keeping a wound open to prove it exists, even if it prevents us from healing. These stories may start as protection, but over time, they turn into chain. The feeling is of living trapped in a plot that we already know by heart. The repetition is comforting because it is familiar to us, but it is also suffocating because it does not let us breathe new paths. We don't realize it. We spend more energy sustaining this fiction than experiencing the life that is in front of us. It is the same as trying to row against the tide with a broken oar, an endless effort that only tires us out. Detachment begins when we recognize that we don't have to continue the story just because we started it. Seneca reminded us that life is like a play. It doesn't matter how long it lasts, but how well it was performed. Sometimes the most courageous act is to change the script, even if it leaves us for a while without knowing our line, because it is in that emptiness, in that space of silence, that new words can be born, and perhaps deep down simple. Letting go of the narrative is not forgetting who we were, but making space to be something more. It's like closing a book and realizing that the world is not limited to the pages we have already read. What will come next is still uncertain, but at least it won't be a repetition of what kept us trapped until now. Happiness as a consequence, not a goal. There is a subtle but decisive difference between seeking happiness as a destination and living it as a side effect of being aligned with oneself. For Seneca, serenity was the child of virtue, not the anxious search for pleasure or approval. Happiness was not a prize to be won at the end of a race, but an inevitable reflection of living in accordance with reason and nature. And yet our time seems to have inverted this logic. We have transformed happiness into an absolute goal, as if it were a place to be found on a map. This confusion creates a constant tension. We run, we accumulate, we display achievement, but the peace we imagined does not appear. It's like drinking salt water to quench your thirst. The more you ingest, the more you realize the dryness. Stoicism invites us to invert the equation, not to ask, what do I need to be happy? But what can I live with integrity today, regardless of how I feel? Happiness, thus, ceases to be the center and becomes a consequence. Many confuse detachment with coldness, as if the absence of possession were the absence of feeling. It is the opposite. Detachment allows us to feel more deeply because it does not require that what we feel last forever. It's like admiring the sunset without trying to capture it in a box. The beauty is precisely in knowing that it will pass, and yet giving yourself completely to that instant. What is love does not need to be possessed. It just needs to be lived. When we free people and things from the obligation to complete us, the relationship changes. We love more light, we care without suffocating, and we accept that the natural course of life is made of arrival and departure. It's a paradox. When we stop trying to hold on to what we love, it remains more naturally. Like a bird that, upon realizing it is not caged, returns of its own accord. Epictetus would say that the secret is an understanding that everything is borrowed from us, places, even our own body, and like any loan, the day will come for repayment. Knowing this does not deprive us of joy. On the contrary, it intensifies. It is because we know that time is finite that we choose more carefully where we place our days and with whom we spend our attention. In the end, happiness is not a finish line, but a trail, a silent trace that remains after we have lived with presence, courage, and virtue. And the more we move away from the need to have to be, the closer we get to something that cannot be bought or taken away. The sufficiency of knowing that for an instant we were whole. The daily training of internal freedom. The freedom we are talking about here is not that of coming and going, but that of not becoming a prisoner of oneself. It is a silent freedom that does not need to be announced because it reveals itself in the simplest gesture. Refusing an invitation without guilt, turning off the phone when the body asks for silence, donating something dear to to fulfill a new role in other hands. Small acts that, repeated day after day, shape a soul that does not depend on what is outside to be whole inside. Epictetus compared life to a loan. Nothing we have truly belongs to us. Not people, not objects, not even the body we inhabit. We are just temporary guardians, and returning what has been given to us is part of the agreement. When we accept it, the anxiety about what is leaving turns into gratitude for what has passed. Possession gives way to present, and we realize that there is no loss when the giving is voluntary. The daily training begins with small but conscious choice, saying no when the impulse is to say yes, to plead. Going offline for a day, not as an escape, but as a reunion. Eating a simple meal and savoring it as if it were the last. These practices do not make us cold. They return us to the control of what is truly ours, our action, our choice, our way of responding to the world. Over time, something changes. We discover that we can get through periods of uncertainty without imploding inside. The sufficiency that once seemed unattainable begins to become familiar. The world may be unstable, but the root remains firm. It's like the mountain that does not try to stop the storm, but welcomes it, knowing that its solidity does not depend on a clear sky. And then we understand that internal freedom is not an event, but a habit, an invisible muscle that is strengthened every time we let go of what we cannot hold. It is a learning that never ends, but that every day brings us closer to something essential, living without the constant feeling of owing the world, and with the calm certainty that we lack nothing to be whole now. Seneca said that life becomes lighter when we travel with little luggage, not just what we carry in our hand, but especially what lives within us. When we choose to live with the essential, we stop being swept away by what is fleeting. Possessions become utilities, not symbols of value. Memories cease to be chains and become pages that we can flip through without fear. It is in this clean space that serenity finds a home. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that the approval of others is an unstable wind. Today it blows in your favor. Tomorrow it turns against you. Living dependent on the judgment of others is like building a house on sand. With every tide, we need to rebuild from scratch. But when we understand that the value of our life is not in external opinions, freedom settles in a silent and irrevocable way. There is no longer an urgency to please because we no longer seek permission to exist. Stoic philosophy reaffirms in a simple and forceful way, happiness is not in accumulating, but in letting go. What leaves is not torn from us. It just returns to the natural flow of things. Like the waves that return to the beach what never belonged to the sea, we are invited to give back what was never truly ours. Detachment thus ceases to be a loss and becomes a conscious return. There is a particular beauty in living this way. It is the beauty of a heart that does not close out of fear, but that also does not chain itself out of need. Love continues, presence continues, but without the demand for eternity. Detachment, when well understood, is a profound act of self-love and freedom. It is creating a space within yourself where nothing needs to be possessed to be fully appreciated. Perhaps this is the true conquest, to walk more lightly, but with firmer step, to know that everything is a passage, and that even so, it is worth living every instant as if it were definitive, because deep down, it is. And if today we could put a weight on the ground, perhaps we would discover that what is left afterward is exactly what we have always sought, the peace of being whole in one's own place.